specifically told me not to get shot!
Project Snowblind was a linear FPS game developed by Crystal Dynamics back in 2005. Despite now holding an almost infamous status in gaming, very few people have actually played it through to the end. So as a fledgling YouTuber, I've decided to throw myself on that particular sword for your enjoyment. To be absolutely honest though, I'm kind of shocked by how little folks actually mention when they're talking about this game. From all the reviews and retrospectives that I've seen, most just call it a bad game, mention its ties to the Deus Ex franchise, and kind of call it a day. But as we're going to see, there's a lot going on in this game. So much so that you'll probably end up questioning what your eyes are showing you.
Hey. Nice work, man. Thanks.
So before we go down the rabbit hole that is Project Snowblind, I think it's only fair for me to lay out the groundwork of just how the hell this game even came to be. I'm sure most of you are already aware, but for those that aren't, Project Snowblind was not the original title for this game. Project Snowblind was originally intended to be the third entry in the Deus Ex franchise, carrying the title of Clan Wars. So instead of the cerebral narrative and branching playstyles of the original Deus Ex, Clan Wars was instead meant to be Deus Ex's answer to Call of Duty, complete with linear storyline and a tacked-on multiplayer developed by a third party. So basically just Deus Ex in name only. Now, it's important to note that while Deus Ex has continued to be heralded as one of, if not the best RPGs out there, it's never really found stable financial success. I'm mentioning this because right around the time that Invisible War was released to a lukewarm critical and commercial reception, Crystal Dynamics quickly realized that attaching Deus Ex to their linear FPS game might not net them the positive press and sales that they had hoped for. Also, apparently Deus Ex creator Warren Spector advised Crystal Dynamics that the game might find more success without associating itself with his franchise. Now, while that sounds really political, in my head I just imagine Warren Spector watching early alpha footage of Project Snowblind and saying, "Get this the hell away from my franchise." So for whatever reason, pretty late in development, Clan Wars was rebranded to Project Snowblind. And I think that's enough backstory for now. Let's get into the game itself. Your first introduction to Project Snowblind is a cutscene that really feels like an amalgamation of a lot of different gaming tropes. For example, when we first hear the foot stomping in the intro, it really sounds like we're about to hear the Hell March from Command & Conquer about to play. We're also treated to a bunch of different split screens that really feels reminiscent of a Metal Gear game, with maps overlaid with title cards that feel sort of like Call of Duty, I guess? And this won't be the last time that we mention these kinds of influences, among many others. So this opening cinematic informs us that the year is 2065, and a regime called the Republic has plunged the region into a civil war. Also, it's really important to note that despite saying the word global, we will be staying in Hong Kong for the duration of this game. So yeah, the original globetrotting that you could enjoy from the original Deus Ex franchise, this game really didn't feel it was important to have that. In fact, this game really doesn't think there's a lot about the original Deus Ex that it's important to still have. I mean, we're talking about a linear FPS game that takes place in one location with a narrative that's so straightforward it would make a Call of Duty game blush. And I'm left wondering, why did they even want to use the Deus Ex title for this game? Now, one last thing, because honestly, we just have to move on, but I had to mention that the game caps this all off by boldly claiming, "All events and characters depicted are true to historical fact."
The fuck does that mean?
Like, I've seen instances where games or films will do the opposite of this, where they state that all persons and events contained within are fictional, but Project Snowblind, on the other hand, says, nope, we know exactly what's going to happen in 2065. This is historical fact. Honestly, I don't even know what to say. Let's just move on. So once you finally get into the game, you receive a speech telling you that you're part of a peacekeeping coalition called the Liberty Coalition. You're also playing as generic protagonist number 411, Nathan Frost. Seriously, like, who comes up with these names? Like, they're so bland. From here, you're told that tensions in the country are high. Things could turn sour at any... Okay, so we're under attack already. I mean, that's cool. I still need to, learn the controls and stuff.
This area is secure.
Jesus Christ! The game doesn't give you a second to breathe. You're literally birthed on the battlefield before you're told how to control anything in the game. But don't worry, guys. Instead of a tutorial, we have something even better. It's called unskippable tip boxes, and I'm not talking about a few of them. I'm talking about a lot.
Took some shrap.
I mean, imagine if other games did this. How about instead of the tutorial on the Pillar of Autumn level, we just have unskippable tip boxes show up every 5 seconds? At first, this really confused me. I was wondering, why would they do this? Why would they break up the gameplay at the start of their game? But then I realized pretty quickly, they wanted to make sure that every player's first experience in the game was filled with explosions and shooting, and they didn't have time for a tutorial because we gotta capture that Call of Duty audience. Now mind you, I have no problem with people that play Call of Duty, but it really can't be overstated just how little faith Crystal Dynamics must have had if they thought that the inclusion of a tutorial risked alienating their intended audience. Anyways, once you fight past all of the unskippable tip screens and waves of enemies, you're treated to a turret section. I mean, what did you expect? It's really important to keep in mind that at this point, you still don't know what the Republic is, or what their goals are, or whatever, it doesn't matter. You shoot down a helicopter with your turret, and things finally go eerily silent. Maybe I was too quick to judge this game. Maybe they intended the start to feel super hectic so that when there's silence, nope, here comes a bomb. Now call me crazy, but did they want the animation to make it look like he just hit his junk against that statue? Yeah, let's slow it. Yeah, look, right there. Huh. Alright, one more time. So after what can only be assumed to be the complete atomization of your penis, you're whisked away. I can't do it. So after being mortally wounded, you're whisked away to be turned into an augmented super soldier. Also, during the scene where you're on this gurney, they keep referring to you as a scarecrow, which actually comes up again 70% of the way through the game, but is never explained.
Kill me, the scarecrow.
I mean, I've even looked through the manual, which surprisingly does mention it, but seems just as confused as the player. Regardless, as Liberty Coalition's newly minted super soldier, it's your job now to save Hong Kong and defeat the Republic.
You are the future, Lieutenant.
Now, before we keep delving into the storyline, let's talk visuals. For 2005, the game looks pretty bad, with textures that are extremely blurry next to weapon and character models that really lack the kind of detail that you'd expect for the time. And it might be fair to have low expectations. I mean, this game is now 15 years old, but then you remember that Fear was also released this same year, and yeah, this still looks pretty bad. The level design is also shockingly bland, with environments that barely look distinct from one another, or even close to what they're trying to approximate. And the original Deus Ex also wasn't visually impressive, but for what it lacked in visual fidelity, it more than made up for in its branching level design and compelling narrative. Project Snowblind, on the other hand, really doesn't have any of that, and even ends up looking worse next to Invisible War, which was released 2 years earlier. Usually when a game scales back its ambition in one aspect, it's so that it can be redirected somewhere else. So you're left asking, if the game's narrative, gameplay, and graphics were all scaled back, where did the budget go? Cutscenes. And there's a lot of them. There is not a moment where you will go more than 10 minutes in this game without some kind of cutscene playing. In fact, there's tons of instances where you might wonder why a cutscene was even necessary at all. We'll get into this more when we come back to the story, but the cutscenes of this game really mess with your head. What I mean by that is that they're totally all over the place. I mean, you get cutscenes like this. And I mean, yeah, that's actually pretty funny and it's well executed. And it might lead you to believe that the developers kind of knew that they were just making a silly game and didn't want themselves to be taken too seriously. But then you finish the game and then you're shown a memorial with the names of all of the soldiers that lost their lives during the campaign. So on one hand, you get cutscenes where the main character is doing Looney Tunes shit, and on the other hand, you have a memorial for dead soldiers. The only thing that you end up feeling pretty sure of is that a ton of the budget had to go into these cutscenes. Like, some of them end up being borderline experimental. Even more infuriating is that this strategy seems to have actually worked on publications. I mean, IGN gave this game 8.8 out of 10. And I know what you're thinking, it's IGN, they'd rate an Enema 8 out of 10. But consider that they actually rated Project Snowblind higher than Call of Duty 2, which was released the same year. Let's move on to sound. Voice acting fluctuates from believable to sort of bizarre. Some actors are reading lines pretty straightforward, while others are really hamming it up big time.
Natives got restless and were rioting all night. Loyalists were duking it out with Republic soldiers.
I may be an antique, Lieutenant, but I'm still a soldier. Those SAM sites!
What's even more baffling is that they had access to legitimate actors. I mean, James Hong and Keon Young are professionals, but they're reading a script that I can only imagine was written by a 13-year-old who won a contest.
I guess this is supposed to be my big speech where I say something heart-stirring and get you all wound up for the fight. Thing is, I don't know how to do that.
The tonal confusion of the narrative also continues here as well, as we're treated to a guy asking whether or not you can still fuck with bioenhancements in the same hallway that we're treated to a guard breaking the Geneva Conventions by attacking a POW.
Can you still, you know, do the deed after the operation?
Sure you can, but only with machines.
Have you met my wife?
Touch you. Is that what you think? That I can't touch you? I can't touch you, huh? There! Whoops!
We're a peacekeeping operation, right? Oh, and I don't want to forget this. For some reason, one mission has all of your allies starting to call you Judge.
You're welcome to join us, Judge.
I swear to God that I do not think this was explained to me at all. Out of nowhere, every member of your team starts becoming fascinated with calling you some variation of Judge.
Make sure that scientist is safe and sound, Judge.
I was Judge right before we got captured.
You never know who's gonna be Judge on a given day. Come on, man, you gotta find that scientist. You gonna own your judgeship or what?
And not to be outdone, the game's music seems to be equally confused with a mix of what I'd call traditional Chinese music, while also not so subtly lifting riffs straight out of games like Halo.
Go! We can handle this!
Gun sounds are pretty average for the time, so nothing really to report there. However, one thing that will make you feel like getting a lobotomy is the constant beeping that's meant to inform you that your health is low. In normal video games, this is done to let you know that you should hide for your health to regenerate. But in Project Snowblind, your health doesn't regenerate. So until you find a health pack... Speaking of guns, let's move on to gameplay. So while Project Snowblind doesn't provide you with as many approaches to gameplay as the original, it does provide you with a surprising number of weapons and gadgets to utilize. Starting with augmentations, you get access to things like map hacks so that you can see through walls, invisibility so that you can sneak past enemies, and ballistic shielding so that you can take more damage without dying. As a way of drip feeding these augmentations, the game hilariously implies that doctors simply took shortcuts on your surgery.
Couldn't get ballistic shielding online.
Excuse me?
Yeah, there were complications.
I see.
Yeah, I'll be somewhere else now.
Your cloaking ability, on the other hand, appears that it can only be activated once Nathan reaches completion from all the murders that he's committed. One other weird thing that you might notice is that when you activate your reflex boost, you end up waving your hand around. It's almost like you're casting a spell on the world rather than gaining a spike of adrenaline or something. Nathan also gets an array of weapons to use, each of which feature a secondary fire. For example, the carbine can launch grenades, the shotgun can shoot sticky grenades, and the flechette can send out a swarm of nanomachines that seek out enemies. Fucking nailed that pronunciation. On top of all of that, you also get an array of grenades that include things like spider bots, EMP, gas, and frag grenades. So despite all of the criticism, you can't really deny that Project Snowblind does offer you more options than your average shooter from 2005. The problem, though, is that the game isn't very difficult. So while you may have 1,000 options to choose from, the game really doesn't incentivize you to actually make use of any of them. You won't really find yourself wanting to use certain augmentations for the entire game because they don't really feel necessary. Like, why would you use invisibility when enemies just die by the hundred? I mean, for the sake of the video, I did try to use other equipment like spider bots, but even when I did, their AI bugged out. They kept EMPing me instead of the enemy. The enemy variety of the game also really doesn't help, since there's only really 3 types of infantry in the entire game. In fact, only one of the enemy types actually requires a different approach, as they have ballistic shields that require an EMP grenade to remove them. However, They must have realized that this wouldn't really work in instances where the player doesn't have an EMP grenade, so they decided that players could just shoot them a lot and kill them all the same. And while admittedly it is a good time seeing enemies launch through the air after being hit by your melee or shotgun, that's pretty much the extent of the fun that you can have. So despite offering players dozens of weapons and fantastical abilities, things just end up being kind of boring. In fact, despite having a runtime of just under 4 hours, Project Snowblind still feels like it overstays its welcome. In fact, I'd wager that most players can probably finish this game in about 3 hours. Now, in an attempt to avoid completely shitting all over this game, I did want to highlight one level that was actually genuinely enjoyable. The sewer level. Do you see what I mean when I say that this game makes no sense? Yes, the level that I had the most fun playing was a sewer level. I mean, other people have mentioned this before, but the sewer level really starts out kind of spooky. Your squad mates are dragged through these tunnels by invisible enemies and they're screaming, and was that a shimmer that just went past our screen? And even once the enemy is finally revealed, they do seem to behave more intelligently than the other enemies that you've already faced. They run away and throw grenades behind themselves, and they try and catch you as you chase them. And this actually incentivizes you to take things slow and use your augmentations. This is a small glimpse at what the gameplay could have been had the budget not all been spent on creating the RC Cola version of a Kojima game. Now, when you first begin playing the game, you could be forgiven for thinking that Project Snowblind refers to the experimental augmentations that you went through. In reality, it refers to the main bad guy's plan to detonate EMPs across every major city to trigger a new Dark Age. Weirdly enough though, this plot element only comes into play 70% of the way through the game. Before then, the majority of the game's runtime has you running around destroying SAM sites, rescuing soldiers, and just performing busy work that has no real connection to the broader narrative. In fact, the main antagonist of the game only shows up 2.5 hours into a 3-hour-long game. Thankfully, he's at least courteous enough to let you in on his backstory before being unceremoniously killed in the subsequent boss battle.
They don't tell you about the constant pain, or the buzz in your skull that won't let you sleep.
He's mad that he was turned into a big Tonka truck of a man and that he's now forced to hear beeping that won't let him sleep anymore. Maybe we should tell him that his health might just be low. So because he's mad that technology has ruined his circadian rhythm, he's decided that no one is allowed to use a toaster anymore, and he decides the best course of action is to EMP the entire planet. It doesn't really matter because you just kill him and then he says that his bombs are still going to go off anyways. And honestly, it seems like the developer knew that the game was meant to end here, but that the runtime was like 2.5 hours, so they just have the player repeat the same SAM site mission and then have some really contrived I'm gonna blow up his big tower at the end moment, which is extremely boring. 8.8 out of 10, guys. So while we're on the topic of characters, the relationships that you form with your allies in the Liberty Coalition end up feeling really forced. For example, once you receive all of your augmentations, you meet this guy.
PFC Walker reporting for duty, sir!
Now it's really important to note that at this point in the narrative, you're just some guy. But despite this, he keeps showing up and he keeps saying all these weirdly nice things to you.
You exemplify the ideals and principles that made me join the Coalition, sir. I look forward to serving you. I won't tell anyone if you won't.
His character model is also what can only be referred to as aggressively ginger. There's also this guy that hangs out in a room next to a giant Buddha statue and is surrounded by monitors with a static image of his own face. You only meet this guy once, but when he dies, the game treats it like he was your mentor. I don't even know who this guy is, but they make this really dramatic and they give him this heroic death scene too. And there's a lot more weird stuff that I'm not showing you guys. But before we can move on, we have to talk about how desperate this game was to make you think it's cool. Even something traditionally seen as cool, like jumping out of a helicopter, wasn't seen as cool enough for Project Snowblind. So instead, they added this weird animation where everyone bungee jumps out of the helicopter and snaps their spine in half. I shit you not, whether it's you or the enemy, every time someone jumps out of a helicopter in this game, they have to go through this animation. I mean, even when performing mundane things like talking on a phone, the game feels it necessary to show Frost power sliding up against a wall. Now, I want to show you my absolute favorite scene in this insane game. Before I show you this though, I want to make it completely known that I did not speed this up or edit it in any way. It's like that scene in Taken 3 where Liam Neeson, as an actor, couldn't jump over a fence anymore, so instead they just cut a scene like 17 different times. And again, I'm just showing you a few instances of the complete insanity of this game, but that's why I was so confused when people would cover this game and not really mention any of the weirder elements that I noticed. It's not like these elements make it go all the way back around to being good again, but these cutscenes and some of the decisions that were made when making this game are pretty interesting. And like I said, it kind of just leaves you asking a lot of questions. Like, why did they think that it was a good idea to attach the Deus Ex franchise to a linear first-person shooter? Why did some review sites rate the game so highly when the single player was only 4 hours long, with little that really made it stand out from the crowd? Why do they treat some character deaths with such reverence while they gloss over others? I think after 15 years, it's pretty unlikely that we're going to get answers to these questions though. So what we're left with is just a relic from the period. Project Snowblind ends up feeling like a weird mix of all the wrong decisions that at times succeeded in making something mildly compelling. Nowadays, games seem to only come from one or two places. You're either a AAA studio where every decision goes through hundreds of people before ending up in the finished product, or you're an indie title developed by just a few people. What we have here though is an instance where you had a lot of people putting their heads together to make something truly weird. Honestly, it doesn't always work out, but it's kind of nice to see a game that doesn't feel like it was made by committee. Would I recommend the game? Still, probably not. For a storyline that's 4 hours long, I can't in good faith recommend it, and the multiplayer died years ago. But if you are really curious, maybe just check out the cutscenes on YouTube. I've only mentioned a few of them in this video here, and there's a lot more insanity to enjoy.